worries. Cool. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Beth. I am a coach with Leland. I work with both the GMAT and the GRE. This is mostly GRE stuff, but I mean, it's fractions, so it's applicable to everything. Thank you for coming. If you want to drop in the chat where you're calling in from, what you're working on, just any quick little introduction that you'd like me to know about you or like other people to know about you. I am, oh yeah, so Isabella is going to drop a link in the chat. Did she do that or let me see? Yes. Oh, cool. Gustavo from Mexico, consulting. Awesome. Um, Mumbai. Oh, this is so cool. Everybody's calling in from everywhere. It must be all hours of the day. So there is a link in the chat. You can fill out a form to enter to win $200 in tutoring and a free bootcamp spot. So go ahead and fill out that link if you're interested in that. Yeah, this is today. This is me. There is a QR code if you're interested in resources. So I guess I'll introduce myself here. I went to Stanford as an undergrad. Sorry, I'm clicking the wrong. I'm trying to get the chat window out of the way. We'll start with, well, sorry, okay. We'll start with these introductions. Then I'll give you a little talk and we'll wrap up. That's pretty straightforward. Here we go. So sorry, I did my undergrad at Stanford University. I studied human biology. I got a master's in education. Was going to go the elementary teaching route and wound up doing more science education. I worked on my PhD in animal biology at UC Davis. I didn't quite finish my dissertation, but I was in that PhD program for a very long time. I'm kind of I'm kind of an educator, science educator, biologist, artist, jack of all trades. But I really enjoy standardized tests. It's maybe kind of an odd thing. I think that once you build your you're ready to take the test when it starts to be kind of fun. It's good to build your confidence and tackle the anxiety. I'm big on the psychology of test taking and getting over the anxiety. I think can play a big role in increasing your score. So and yeah, I've taken both the GRE and the GMAT. Got good scores. So I tutor. I started tutoring. Gosh, I started tutoring the SAT originally more than 15 years ago. I've tutored the GRE and the GMAT. I don't know if does anyone have any questions on my background? I don't know. I also have my dog laying on the couch next to me, so hopefully there won't be any puppy interruptions. But we'll see. So, okay. So part of the reason that I picked fractions as the topic to cover is that this, going along with the psychology of test taking, this is one of those topics that, like, even if you're good at it and you know how to do it, when you see these questions on the test, they like raise your cortisol, like your anxiety levels, and people tend to shut down. So I just wanted to do a quick overview of how, like, I think about these, how I make them more approachable, less intimidating. So this is like there is an official GRE math review PDF that you can get from the ETS website. That is just an outline of all of the math topics they cover. So this is probably the hardest fraction topic that they cover. So we'll look here at how do you simplify expressions like this, where you have weird things like pi in the numerator or denominator. How do you simplify fractions like this, where you have radicals or square root things anywhere in the fraction? And also we'll talk a little bit about how that applies to like algebraic expressions and fractions. So the first thing is when you see a fraction like this with the pi over 2 plus pi over 3, don't get scared, right? So the first tip is approach it like you would approach any other fraction. Just think like, well, if that was a 1 on top, what would I do? And you probably all know what you would do is you would find a common denominator, right? So find a common denominator. This would be 6 in this case. So you're going to multiply by 2 fractions that are equivalent to 1. And I mean, I know you know how to do this, but like this is a this is a concept that will come up later in harder questions, which is why I'm pointing it out here. So we have 3/3 is equivalent to 1, 2/2 is equivalent to 1. So you wind up with 3/6 plus 2/6 equals 5/6, right? Pretty straightforward. You do the same thing when it's pi. It's actually not really any harder or scarier. So you treat it like pi was a variable. So if you had x/2 plus x/3, you would do the same thing as you would with a regular fraction. You're going to multiply by, fractions equivalent to 1 to make a common denominator. So we wind up with 3x plus 2x/6 equals 5/6. If you see a weird symbol like pi in your fraction, just pretend it's an x, pretend it's a variable. So same thing, right? Common denominator, we're just going to make it 3π/6, 2π/6, combine them, 5π/6. So not scary. Now, how might you see this tested? You might see this in a quantitative comparison question. And as you may know, just in case anybody's just getting started with GRE studying, the format of these questions, the answer choices are always the same. There's always either quantity A is going to be, this is going to give you two quantities. You're going to pick either A is greater, B is greater, they're equal, or the relationship can't be determined. And a common tip is, if you memorize these answer choices before the test day, you don't have to read them on test day. That can save you some time. So here's an example of how something like that might be tested. Let's say we're given a constraint. We know that x can't equal 0 and y can't equal 0. And in this case, that's just important because we have x and y on the denominator of each of these terms. And so we know that the denominator can't equal 0, right? So question, what is larger, 1/x plus 1/y, or 2/x plus 2/y, I'm sorry, 2x plus 2y over xy? And I will ask, it's okay if nobody wants to do this, but does anyone want to take a stab at how they would approach this question? Okay, so Rashab says the answer is D. Gustavo says it's B. No worries, no worries. Yeah, Gustavo, do you want to feel free to okay, and then let's see. Will says split B up. So Gustavo, do you want to say it out loud? Yeah.
Yeah, so my reasoning, I don't know if I'm right, but I first would try to combine the two expressions on the quantity A. So I did y, so I multiplied y and x crossed. So I have y plus x divided by xy, which is the same denominator as the quantity B. And then you just get the 2 on quantity B out of the x plus y. So you have the same expression in both sides, just that in the quantity B you have it multiplied by 2, so it must be greater.
Excellent. Perfect. Yes. So B is basically the same thing as A, but multiplied by 2, right? Once you figured out like that, that's perfect. Now, so yes, that reasoning is great. And just let me see, I think I should have a slide where I write that out. So A should wind up looking like this, right? X plus y over xy, or vice versa. And the tricky part here now is then determining is B automatically greater just because it's twice as big as A. So I'll let you all think on that. That's okay. Yeah, that's a really easy place to because you're like, oh, I did the tricky part, right? This was the tricky part. And then they're like, oh, just kidding, we tricked you again. So a tip that I like is this acronym Zone F, which is, I didn't make it up, somebody else made it up, but I got it off the internet. But it's to remember to plug in, if you're thinking about how to solve a question, which one's bigger, think about plugging in 0, if you can plug in 0. Of course, here we can't plug in 0, but 1, negative numbers, extreme numbers, meaning like infinity or a million or whatever, a fraction, and that's generally a fraction specifically between 0 and 1, so 0.5, right? And see if that changes the value of, oh, sorry, I saw the question. This style of question only appears on the GRE, but the algebra of the fractions is still relevant to the GMAT. The question type that you'll see on the GMAT that's weird, that's not on the GRE, sorry, I'm looking at the chat, is data sufficiency. So those are kind of fun, but you won't see this specific question type, but similar concepts. Yeah, thank you for asking. So basically here, the negative, I think the correct answer is D, right? Because you could have a positive X and a negative Y, you could have a negative X and a positive Y. So you don't know if this fraction, if X plus Y over XY is a negative number, then twice a negative number is going to be technically a smaller number, right? Or if it's a positive number, then twice the positive number is going to be a larger number. So we technically don't know just based on this, but if they had specifically told you that X was greater than 0 and Y was greater than 0, then you would know that B was bigger. Does that make sense? Any questions on that one? And awesome, thank you. And Gustavo, thank you so much for talking through that with us. Where in Mexico are you? Random thought.
Monterrey.
What was that? Monterrey?
Monterrey, yeah, South Texas, on the north of Mexico.
Very cool, very cool. My grandpa's from that area. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's see. What's the next thing here? Okay. So with these, again, they look intimidating. They're really not that much worse than a regular fraction. So whenever you divide fractions, choices C and D for the quantitative comparison, they are, so quantity A is bigger, B is quantity B is bigger, C is they're the same, and D is you can't tell. You don't know which one's bigger. You don't like have enough information. And we'll do another practice one of those toward the end here too. So for fractional expressions like this, whenever you divide a fraction, you just multiply the first fraction by the reciprocal of the second fraction. So the flipped over version of the second fraction, right? So here we're going to get 1 over root 2 times root 5 over 3. And there are a couple rules, just as a refresher. It's hard to remember these sometimes. So if you have a square root of something times the square root of something else, you can multiply the things inside the square roots. So root A times root B equals root AB. If you are on, personally, I'm not a big like rule memorizer. I'm a big like intuition and like understanding the material and kind of reminding yourself of the rules logically if you forget them on the test. So like if I were trying to remember if I could do this on the test day, if for some reason the rules slipped my mind, I would just think, okay, is the square, if I did like the square root of 4 times the square root of 9, that's like 2 times 3. Is that the same thing as the square root of 4 times 9, which is 6? Yes. So if I ever needed on the test day to just like quickly refresh, I mean, hopefully you'd remember the rule, it'd be faster, right? But if you don't remember the rule, always just like pick easy numbers to test the rule, and then that can help you with the algebra. Anyway, same idea here. If you have a radical over a radical, you can divide the things inside, and you can test your knowledge of that using a real example. So, okay, but don't do this. You can't add the things inside the square root. So square root of 9 plus square root of 4 would be 3 plus 2, which is 5. That is not equal to square root of 13. So yeah, just the same with subtraction. So just be careful. Be careful on those. So looking at this here, we have square root of 5 over 3 times the square root of 2. And then sometimes you might need to do one additional step, which is get rid of the radical on the bottom to simplify it. Does anybody remember how to do that? And I can just tell you, I'm just trying to make it so you don't get bored. Oh, yes. So squaring the expression is a good guess. You could do that if you could square both sides. Like if you had like square root of 5 over 3 root 2 equals x. If you do the same thing to both sides, then they maintain then they're both like the same value relative to each other. But if it's just one thing by itself, then squaring it like changes the value. Like if I had like 5 over 3 and I squared it, now I'd have 15 over 9. That's not like the same value. But what you can do is you can multiply by a fraction that's equal to 1, right? So in this case, yeah, so you could, and you could do by the whole denominator, or you could just do by the root. So here, The square root of 2, no problem, Jason. So the square root of 2, exactly, yeah, exactly, Simran, yeah. So square root of 2 over square root of 2 would be, let me see if I, yeah. So this is a fraction equal to 1. So this expression, even though it's, not like intuitively easy to see, this expression has the same value as this if you plugged it into a calculator. And so you can multiply the things inside. So you get square root of 10. The square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is just 2. And so you get 6 on the bottom. So that would be a simplified version of that expression. Okay, and a lot of this is probably stuff you did like in high school and never had to do again. So you probably like, you probably remember it like way back in there, but it gets a little rusty because when do we ever do this? So here's another one. We're going to simplify this. And this is a little tricky, but again, it's just behaving like regular fractions. So we can break this up into the top and the bottom. We cannot just subtract though, remember? So we can't say like 2/3 minus 1/2 and put it in the square root. But what we can do is say square root of 2 divided by square root of 3, square root of 1 divided by square root of 2. And then we can make a common denominator. And again, we're going to make a common denominator by multiplying by a fraction that's equal to 1, right? But in this case, our fraction that's equal to 1 is going to have the radicals in it. So to get from root 2 over root 3, to make it a common denominator of root 6, we're going to multiply, instead of it being like 2 over 3 and we're multiplying by 2 over 2, it's just, there's the same thing, but roots in there, right? So we get a common denominator of root 6 on both sides, because by multiplying both fractions by a fraction that's equal to 1, we wind up with, and feel free if I'm going through the images too fast, whatever, I know it's hard to follow this stuff verbally sometimes. So we have root 2 times root 2. You could just say 2, but I kept it as root, so it's square root of 4 over square root of 6 minus square root of 3 over square root of 6. The temptation here is going to be to say 4 minus 3. You can't do that, but you can give them the common denominator. So you have square root of 4 minus square root of 3 over 6, or 2 minus square root of 3 over 6. And if you wanted to, I don't know if I put it in here, but you could go the one extra step to get rid of the radical on the bottom. Yeah. So that would multiply by root 6 over 6, and you wind up with, it's kind of messy looking. We could pull a 3 out of there. Did I do it? I did. Yes. Okay. So sorry, let me, so we had 2 minus root 3 over 6. We got rid of the root on the bottom by multiplying by root 6 over root 6. And something you will see on both the GMAT and the GRE, they'll ask you for square roots like this, like square root of 18. They'll want you to simplify, where you might notice that like, what is the square number inside of the square root of 18? It's 2 times 9, right? So we have the square root of 2 times 9. We can simplify that a little bit by pulling those back out separate again, and then making that a 3. So does that make sense? Are there any questions on that? Sorry, I'm not, it's hard to judge. I can't see most of your faces, so it's hard to judge if that made sense. But are we good on that? Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, let's see. So here is another quantitative comparison question with, difference of squares. Let me think about that. Yes, when does difference of squares come in? Difference of squares. Okay, sorry. There's a question in the chat from Connor that says, can you do difference of squares? You would do, so sometimes, I wonder if, I'm just going to write on the side of this blank slide on the blank side of the slide to answer Connor's question. So if you had a fraction that was like 1 over, that's kind of thin. Let me make that pencil thicker. Sorry, let me make this. Let me see if I can make this thicker. Or maybe just blacker. Dark gray. Okay, we'll go with that. So if you had 1 over, let's say 1 minus the square root of 2, that's a great, oh, on the last question, no. So if you have a fraction like 1, sorry, now I'm like, wait, let me look at the last question to make sure that I'm telling you the truth. Last question. On the top, you could, on the bottom, you couldn't. So I'll tell you why. Okay. So 1 over 1 minus the square root of 2. If you wanted to get rid of this square root of 2 on the bottom here, you couldn't just multiply by the square root of 2 over the square root of 2, because you would wind up like, you would just wind up switching where the square root of 2 was, right? So you'd have square root of 2 on top, and then you'd have like square root of 2 minus 2, and it wouldn't really help you all that much. So on the bottom, or on this example, you couldn't just use this technique. What you could do is multiply by a fraction that was equal to, that was still equal to 1, but you would use the difference of squares, which means if you multiplied by a fraction with 1 plus the square root of 2 on the bottom. So difference of squares is when, if you have like x minus y times x plus y, instead of having like a term in the middle that has x's and y's, you only wind up with an x squared term and a y squared term, right? So you have x squared minus y squared. So if you have something like this and you want to get rid of the radical and you multiply by plus instead of minus, you wind up with 1 squared minus the square root of 2 squared on the bottom. And so you wind up with 1 minus 2. And so you can get rid of that radical. I actually wrote this wrong though, but you have to do the same thing on the top, right? Because this fraction has to be equal to 1. So you could start, this is messy. How do I erase all of it? Clear all drawings. Okay, so 1 over 1 minus the square root of 2. If you multiply that by a fraction equal to 1, so 1 over 1 plus square root of 2 over 1 plus the square root of 2, you could get rid of that radical on the bottom and move it to the top. Why we feel the need to do that, why it matters that much really if it's a radical on the top versus the bottom, I don't know, but it's just kind of the way that people tend to do it. It's just kind of a formality, I guess. But so you'd wind up with, this over -1. Anyway, so yeah, good question about completing the squares. Let's see. On the last question, if we had done that on the previous question with the top, it would have had the effect of, so we could do it on the top here, right? But it would wind up moving the radicals back down to the bottom because we'd multiply by like 2 root 6 plus 3 root 2. And so we'd wind up getting rid of the radicals on the top, but we'd wind up moving them to the bottom. So yeah, if it was flipped upside down, that would be a good approach. Okay. I think this is actually the last example that I have for now. So when you see, so it's another quantitative comparison question. So again, quantity A is bigger, quantity B is bigger, they're the same, or we don't know. And here it's asking, is X bigger or is 1 bigger? And all we know is that this big equation is equal to 0. So we know a couple more things actually, based on, we know that X can't equal -1 because the bottom can't be equal to 0. We know that X can't equal +2 because that can't, neither of these can be equal to 0 because you can have a 0 on the bottom, right? But other than that, and actually, you know what? Let me be quiet from there. Let me give you like a second to think about how you would solve this without me talking. And if anyone wants to talk through it, let me know. And I specifically chose this question because it looks intimidating. It's actually easier than it looks. But it's one of those questions that's going to like make you look at it, kind of, freeze up, shut down. But yeah, exactly. Perfect. So the only thing you have to worry about here is the numerator. You can actually pretty much ignore the denominator, except for knowing like, well, it can't equal these numbers and seeing if that has anything to do with the bottom. But you can just ignore the bottom because whenever whenever the whole thing is equal to 0, we know that the top must be equal to 0. So we know that one of the factors in the top must be equal to 0, right? So either x is equal to 0 or x plus 3 is equal to 0. And so x is either equal to 0 or -3. And so then in this case, out of those 4 answer choices, what would you choose? A, B, C, or D? So A is bigger, B is bigger, they're the same, or we don't know. Yeah, so B is bigger, right? Because 1 is bigger than 0 and -3. If I had chosen an answer for quantity B when I wrote this, if I had put like -1, then the correct answer would be D, because we don't know. X could either be 0 or X could be -3. So that's an example of when you might choose D, right? If I had made the top be X minus 1 parentheses squared or something, or just X minus 1, then X would be equal to 1, B would be equal to 1, you choose C, right? So a good thing when you're practicing questions like this, I think a really good way to improve your skills at like catching the tricks is to think like a question writer. So if you were going to, once you do a question, think, well, how could I have changed this equation to make it like B or C or D, or like what is the trick that they put in here? You know what I mean? To try to catch me up, and that can help you like catch them when they're on the test. Okay, so overall, let's see, I tried to go slower and I'm still finishing a little bit early, but we can talk more. So overall, my key takeaways is don't get scared. Yes, there are questions with the answer D. That's a good question. So with quantitative comparison questions with the answer D of like, I don't know which one is greater. Sometimes it is because they haven't given you enough information to solve the problem. So for example, if you have like most of the time in order to solve a system of equations like x plus y equals 3 and 2x plus 4y equals 7 or something, you need to have as many equations as you have variables. So you have to have 2 equations to find the values of 2 variables. If they don't give you like enough equations to solve, then that sometimes is a way to find out. That also applies to the GMAT for the weird question type that I was talking about before. They have the GMAT has like data sufficiency questions. So they'll be like, do you have enough information to determine if this is true? And so that's kind of the equivalent of this. But so if they don't give you enough equations to solve for each variable, then no, you don't have enough information to determine if it's true. And I would say that like, I think they probably write it so that each answer choice is roughly equally likely to pop up. You know what I mean? So like D is just as likely as C or B or A. They write it different ways. And you learn like the best strategy often is to figure out first if the question is solvable. These aren't great examples of that, but for some of the quantitative comparison questions, the first thing you're going to ask is like, can I even no, it comes up throughout the entire, the complex fractions come up with all of them. I did examples with quantitative comparison because most people are pretty familiar with multiple choice. And so people don't tend to need as much practice thinking about them. Do you know what I mean? Because we do like regular multiple choice for everything. So I just use quantitative comparison examples because they're a little trickier, and so people tend to need more practice. But yeah, complex fractions could come up anywhere. It might say like, here is the fractional expression that we're going to simplify, and does it simplify to like, is this expression equivalent to A, B, C, D, whatever. Or they might say, type in the value of, I don't know. Yeah, it can come up anywhere. The complex fractions can come up anywhere. Yeah, good question. And then any other questions so far on while I'm looking at the chat on the fractions or For the manual entry questions where it's in fraction form, would you ever have to type in a negative number or say root 2? I don't think there's a way to type in a root on a question like that. I'm actually going to poll the audience here. Does anyone, I don't, a negative number maybe, but root 2, no, I don't think so. Yeah. Sorry, I should know that, but I just don't think there's a way to do it. Transfer from the calculator. Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I have not specifically seen, I'll say I've not specifically seen a question like that. I guess it's possible, but think, yeah, I'm sorry. I wish I had a better answer for you. I'm not actually totally sure. But I think they try to make it like pretty clean cut. If you're gonna do a numeric answer, they want it to be like, yeah, sorry. I wish I should know. I don't know. Good question though. Yeah. What would you advise is the best way to study tricky fractions? Is there a platform online with random questions? Good question. So my advice in general is to use the official ETS prep material as much as you can. I know there are a lot of other resources available, but the ETS material is going to be the most accurate, right? So I like to just use the official, I'm looking at on my shelf right now, the official guide to the GRE general test is the book. And then there's also like 2 books that come with it. Jason, I'll get to that. Let's see. So there's like a math supplement and a verbal supplement. Some of the other resources online, like there's like TTP people use, I know, like there's a lot of questions that can be like, the extra hard questions are maybe a little too hard, they're not necessarily like entirely accurate to that. So anyway, I would use, and yes, and for the GMAT, the same thing, the official the GMAT, the official website, they have a nice, or GMAT. Okay, I haven't used GMAT Club, but yeah, the official guide's really good. The official website for the GMAT has a nice like free guide through the material. They do a better job, I think, than the GRE of giving you like a guide to all of the subject matter. But in both cases, I would say stick to the official questions and the official practice tests as much as you can, because they're going to be the most accurate. And I'm actually a big advocate of not overstudying. I'm probably different than a lot of tutors in that way. I'm not somebody who's going to say like, study for 300,000 hours, like 5 hours a day, like 8 days a week. You know what I mean? Like that's not me. I'm going to say like, it's going to go best if you start like 2 or 3 months before the test, because you're not going to get quite as overwhelmed. But like, get a book. Like you can get a book at the bookstore, go through the topics in the book. If you get to a topic that you get stuck on or need a little help on, then that's usually when I say like a tutor might be helpful. I personally generally, maybe this is, blasphemy, but I personally generally think most people don't need a tutor every step of the way. I think it's usually the most useful if either you're studying and you're not improving your score. Then usually you need a little bit of like help figuring out which areas you need to study the most. And then that's when you go to a tutor, or like an area that you just like, I don't get it, like help. And then you go to a tutor. But so I would say like, get a book, get an official book, read through the stuff. It's boring, but like, do it 20, 30 minutes, an hour every day, a couple days, read through it. If you get stuck, find extra resources to help you. There's Reddit forums for GRE and GMAT. Some of you might have come from the Reddit forum. You can ask questions. I'm sometimes on there answering questions because weirdly, I think it's fun. Good question. Okay, so Connor says, would I say GMAT quant is more challenging than GRE? And what do I think of Magoosh for prep questions? Okay, both good questions. Magoosh, I think, is useful for, so if you're studying the GRE vocabulary, Magoosh has GRE vocabulary flashcards and a vocabulary flashcard app that you can download on your phone that makes it nice to just like, through the day, you can like go through some words and hopefully they stick in your head better. It's a little more interactive. I'm not as familiar of the Magoosh with the Magoosh prep questions, I've mostly used it for vocabulary, so I'm not too sure. In terms of GMAT quant and GRE, if anybody's here thinking about, do I want to take the GMAT? Do I want to take the GRE? How do I decide which one? Both of these tests underwent big changes in the past year. They both got a lot shorter. The GRE did not remove topics. The GMAT did. So I want to say it's the I want to say that I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I think they took off geometry. So they're different. They're very different. But I think that there are fewer topics now on the GMAT technically. The way they ask the questions is a little trickier because it's a little different than the way we're used to questions being asked. I personally think the GMAT is a better test, like in terms of testing. It doesn't matter. Anyway, they're different. Look at the topics that are the math topics that are covered on each one and see if like you hate geometry, then pick one. Then pick the GMAT basically. But yeah, they're interesting. In terms of, so tricky fractions won't be a huge percent of all of the material on the test, in terms of specifically the kinds of questions that I showed you today, but that ability to just manipulate fractions in general will be. So the more that you're comfortable, converting common denominators, doing it with algebra, whatever, is going to be better. Yeah. If you are interested in, again, I really like the official GRE math prep PDF that you can find on their website. And same for the GMAT, like just go to their official thing and it'll have a list of topics. And I just recommend like skim through the topics, find the ones that you don't remember as well and study those. But that's my best advice. Yeah, any other questions? I'm a little scatterbrained here answering all the questions, but hopefully it's helpful. Yes. Yeah. So I don't know. Do you have any, let's see, what time is it? I lost my clock because my screen is 4:39. Okay. Yeah, 5 more minutes. Any other questions you want to ask? I can give you my try to give you my full I'll give you all of my test taking advice that I can think of in the last 5 minutes here. Let me think. Yes, so start with the official document, skim through it, find the topics that you need help on the most. How many of you get test anxiety? Does anybody get bad test anxiety? Yeah. I recommend, if you get a lot of test anxiety, I recommend starting with the oh, sorry, I saw something else on the chat here. Okay, so there's no calculator for the GMAT quant. I changed from GMAT to GRE because of the quant. GMAT higher percentiles are much harder to get for me. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. And a lot of master's programs saying that GRE or GMAT is optional. Do you believe it's still a good idea to take test point application? That's a good question. I think I'm not an expert on that. I think with something like that, it often depends on how well you score compared to the average person. If you are a strong test taker and a high scorer, then a high score can't hurt, right? But in terms of if it's optional, if taking it helps, I'm guessing that's kind of program specific, so I really couldn't personally say. But yeah, and then yeah, it's so funny that you all don't like the GMAT quant. I love the GMAT quant. I think the GMAT is so fun. But I think it's because like the GRE is a lot like the SAT and the GMAT is more like a logic puzzle. But anyway, so yes, so get your official guides, skim through, find the areas you need help, use the official practice questions as much as possible. If you need something extra, Yeah, check. Oh, right, test anxiety. Thank you. For a strategy, would you recommend to do all the questions you feel comfortable with first and then go back to harder ones that you marked? Good question. Okay, so test anxiety. I was going to say for test anxiety, practice untimed first. Build your confidence. Get to know that you have the ability to answer the questions because you probably do, right? Like, make yourself confident in solving the questions. And then what I recommend is do the test two ways. Like, do it timed, but don't worry about your score and just worry about getting a sense of completing the questions in the time, like just building that intuitive sense of like, okay, this question, I've been on it for too long, I need to move on, like skip it, right? And like, don't beat yourself up about the score at all, just get a sense of timing and then do it again, trying to get as many questions right as you can and not worrying about the time, and like start to like integrate those two senses together, and that helps you get over your fear of the time pressure, right? You're like, so like, um yeah, uh I recommend starting, I recommend, yeah, using the official test question, ETS questions the whole way if you can. um do I recommend starting your prep with a practice test? I do. I know there's a limited, that's another thing that's kind of a challenge right now because they just released the shorter version of the test, is that there aren't as many like official practice tests available. But because so for the GMAT, the official practice tests now, it's important to use the new ones because they changed the test. For the GRE, they didn't change the material in the test, they just made it shorter. So you can use the old versions of the test and it's still the same material. But yeah, I recommend using the official stuff as much as possible. Um, and do you recommend to do all the questions you feel comfortable with first and then go back to the harder ones that you marked? That's another one that's going to be a different answer for the GRE versus the GMAT. The GRE is, uh, the GMAT is question by question. It adapts the level of the test. And so you can mark three and then go back and change, or you can mark several and go back and change three at the end. But um, for the GRE, yeah, let me think about that. What's happening right now in my brain is that I'm drawing a blank because I'm working with somebody on the SAT too. And so all of a sudden I'm like, am I going to tell you the wrong thing about the GRE, the wrong advice about the GRE? Sorry, sometimes I get a little muddled in my head. Yes. Yeah. 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 Okay. So most of us like, for all of you guys, do you have the choice between the GMAT and the GRE? Um, or who's taking the GMAT, who has to take the GMAT, who has to take the GRE? GMAT. Yeah. Leaning towards the GRE. Schools don't care anymore. Okay. Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. So we got a mixture here. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Um, yeah. Yep. I'm on team GMAT, I have to say. But I understand why the GRE is easier. I tutor the GRE way more actually, but I understand like why the GRE is okay. What I was saying about the GRE algorithm is that I'm spacing out and I can't remember. That's what I was trying to say. I heard the GRE you can skip questions and go back, but GMAT isn't as flexible. Yeah. Yeah. The GMAT, I know the GMAT is it's new that you can even go back and change your answers. You couldn't do that before. Um, yeah, well, and that's going to practice this. Also, okay, so here's another thing I would say about if you're deciding the GRE versus the GMAT, because the GMAT is weirder than most standardized tests you've taken in the past. Don't beat yourself up if your first score on the GMAT is relatively lower than your first score on the GRE, because it's easier to score higher on the GRE because it's a more normal test that we're used to taking. The GMAT's weird, but once you learn how to do the questions on the GMAT, it gets easier. Do you know what I mean? Once you just get used to thinking like the question types that they're asking. So if you're trying to decide between the two, I would say like take a practice test on both of them. Um, See which one you like better. Most people I've talked to prefer the GRE. But like don't necessarily compare your percentiles on the scores right away, like you'll probably be a little lower on the GMAT, and that's okay. Just whichever one feels whichever one your school requires, obviously, or whichever one feels like more suitable for you. But anyway, sorry, I'm not usually this scatterbrained. I'm usually talking to like one person at a time. And so then like you ask me a question and I'll be like, oh, I don't remember. And I'll Google it and I'll make sure that I'm telling you the truth. But with the slides up, I can't. Anyway, hopefully you are welcome. If you have any of those questions, I'll put my email in here. If you have any questions that you would like me to actually look up the answer to and get back to you, there's my email. I would be happy to do that. And in general, yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome to message me on, thank you. You're welcome to message me on Leland. We can do like a free 15-minute call. I'm a very no pressure person, so you're welcome to talk to me and not book or whatever. Like I'd love to work with you, but I'm not going to pressure you into anything. That's not my deal. So, this is, yeah. And then if you want to talk to somebody who works with all the tutors and they can help you pick the best person to work with you or help you find what you're looking for, there's a QR code. So thank you all. Forgive me for being a little bit like, but it's really nice to talk to all of you. And I wish you the best of luck. Good luck with everything. Yeah. Thank you so much. Have a great day.